sync up the audio.
Sacred Heart Health Service.
Yeah, I think we're over there.
Oh, okay.
Strange. So we have about 20 minutes before the camera shuts off.
Yep.
You'll hear that.
Yep.
Welcome to Talking Dark Live, our symposium-like event where we get into the artists that are with me in the grad show.
Thank you for inviting me. It's going to be fun, I hope.
So, in getting into your work, I thought we could start before now.
Can I ask questions back?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
Okay, go good.
Go for it.
Okay.
But because we're talking about art and life, I thought perhaps we could start with your previous career, because a lot of us, you've had previous work that's shaped your current practice. So could you maybe start by giving us a brief outline of what kind of role you had in industrial design, namely in Hong Kong, the work you were doing over.
Okay, yep, sure. So in Hong Kong, so I went straight to Hong Kong after I graduated from industrial design degree here, and I worked as an industrial designer, so making manufactured goods, elevators, phones, telephones, pages, things like that. So yeah, I was an intern there, and then I moved on to be a designer for a design group in Hong Kong, which was fantastic in two ways. It was firstly good to start my career in design, but it was also just an amazing cultural immersion. So it was interesting being in Hong Kong, because when I had grown up in Australia, I thought I was Chinese, and then moving to Hong Kong realised, you're not actually Chinese. So then understood where I was, somewhere in the middle. But so design is my background, industrial design in particular, which is designing objects and systems.
Right. And what was the work you were doing for Canon?
So when I came back to Australia, I was working for Canon Research, and so we were developing new technology. So it's really doing design research into technologies that are 5 to 10 years out on the horizon. So not designing existing products, but something we expect to happen in 5 to 10 years. So it's quite speculative, which makes it quite similar to art, actually. So that was good.
Give us a clap. Hell yeah.
We're good to go.
Nice. So, back in Australia from Hong Kong.
Yep. So when I got back from Hong Kong, I started working in design research, which is using design to do applied research, and we were working on new technology. So I was working for Canon Research, and we were making technologies that are 5 to 10 years out, and so it's quite speculative, which makes it, really actually quite similar to art. And I then moved on to CSIRO, where I was doing less design research, unfortunately, and more production work, which was not to my taste. So kick CSIRO and start a master's in drawing, because I like ideas and because I want to do more research.
So the CSIRO gig, that was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was a lot of computational law and ethics and things?
Yeah. So at CSIRO, the work at CSIRO was the content of the work was interesting. I was doing one project which is computational law, which is essentially turning the law into code for the purposes of making some workflows more efficient. So perhaps you might run contracts just with code. So you wouldn't need all the people, essentially you don't need lawyers running around doing that paperwork when you can just automate it. So that was the computational law side we were working on, which was really interesting, but unfortunately for me, the scientists at CSIRO and the researchers there get to do a lot of the interesting stuff, and the designers just make prototypes, which is not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the ideas and making the ideas evolve. So, which is what I had been doing for 18 years at Canon Research. So that's why CSIRO wasn't really fitting. But I also did some data security stuff, which was really interesting. Different ways we can secure data, and working with some of the government's really large data sets, health data sets and things like that. And actually, something interesting happened there that made me realise the importance of visualisation. So the story goes that there was the government have these large data sets that we all have access to, but when they're in the numerical form that they're in, they're not very penetrable. People can't, you can access them, but what are you looking at?
Yeah.
But some of the departments I was working with, one of them visualized some of this data, and in the visualization made it accessible to the public, and suddenly that data became confidential.
Yeah, right.
So the data had been there for 10 years. The data had been there for 10 years, accessible to everyone.
But as soon as it's readable, they bury the shit.
Yeah, so that it kind of highlighted to me this. It's like, oh, put a lock on it.
Yeah.
Now they know. So that spoke to me about the potential for visual culture to express things that are really big, or really small, but meaningful.
Yeah, and kind of how charged these things are, right? Like how much impact, a neatly assembled spreadsheet of diagrams has compared to, that lengthy prose that they kind of intentionally bury everyone in.
Well, these were actually maps. So the data had just been, in regular, numerical form. But when it was compiled as, does that mean this on the map? Oh, shit, yes. So, it was in map form that it became problematic.
So I guess, it's probably already a bit clear how your previous work's affecting your work to people that know you, but something I find interesting is you dove straight into conceptual practice.
Okay, so when I was working at Canon Research, I went and did an undergraduate degree at Sydney, SCA, and that was very much conceptual focused, the school at that time. So that was quite a long time ago. So my practice has always been kind of conceptual. That's actually the only way I knew art.
Yeah, right, that's just your natural way of...
Yeah, that was just my... It's like if that's all you know, then that's all you know. So that's what I thought art was. And so I threw myself into NAS, thinking that, this is going to be quite the opposite. It's going to be really materially focused and very process-oriented and all this kind of stuff. And it has been a culture change, but I've really enjoyed it. And I think there's something to learn from both aspects of this. So I'm kind of sitting... my practice kind of moves around. It's still very conceptual, but it's way more sensitive to space and material and all these other things that you get at NAS.
Yeah, and I mean, something I can sense in your drawing that's very similar to what I'm doing is there's a heavy focus on materials and how these materials are shaped by time and the environment. Time is a material of the work.
Yes, that's right.
And I guess I'm kind of interested to hear just your thoughts with time in relation to your conceptual practice.
Okay. So when I started my master's and I started thinking about the relationship between drawing and time, because drawing is inherently temporal. You could say that everything's inherently temporal, but drawing is really temporal because the materials are essentially ephemeral, and the process is very much laying down the present moment, and it can be erased. So there's a lot of temporality in drawing. So I was looking at the relationship between drawing and time, and that necessitated thinking about time itself. So I've done a lot of research in the philosophy and physics of time, and the point I've come to with this is that there's 100 ways of thinking about time, and with my practice I'm not going to foreground or privilege one idea over another. So I'm just going to sit with all of these ideas about time and look at the resonance that might happen between those and my practice. So I'm totally okay with the idea that at Planck scale there's no time. And for Dogen, who's a Buddhist monk and scholar, there is no flow of time. There's only the being of present. That is, your activity makes time. You are time. So I'm very comfortable with having these really quite contradictory ideas about time, and working with all of them or whatever comes up with the materials.
I mean, that's kind of the reality of what we're living in now as well, a little bit, isn't it? That like there are these tensional ideas that seem to contradict each other, but they're all kind of right. Like you can say one theory of time is right, but at the end of the day, time is an artificial construct we've made so that we can understand the world just a little bit better. So,
essentially it's an enigma and there's no answer, actually, which is what makes it a wonderful thing to do a master's on. But the other interesting thing is you can look at these kind of disparate and seemingly contradictory ideas but find similarities and parallels in them between physics and Zen Buddhist teachings and things like that. So that finding those resonances has been interesting too. But trying to not be too prescriptive about how I then use them. So I do this thing called, cut me off whenever I talk too much because I'm about to rabbit on.
This is great, keep going.
I use a process, I know that in my methodology I use this thing called abductive reasoning. And abductive reasoning is just the putting together of disparate ideas to form new concepts. It happens...
What? I could have really used that for my paper.
Yes. So what's really interesting me and what I'm stewing on more recently is when I come into NAS, a lot of people talk about the unconscious. And I'm sitting there thinking, what's the difference between the unconscious and abductive reasoning? So, there's deductive reasoning, abductive reasoning, there's different types of reasoning. It seems to me there is a close relationship, if not they're the same thing, between what is called the unconscious in art and abductive reasoning, which is putting together disparate ideas, some of them conscious, some of them unconscious. So the way I feed this process is that I just consume widely. I read widely, I look widely, and I talk widely, and I rabbit on. And it may be television, it may be physics that I'm reading, it may be something else. And I just sit with those ideas and let them make their own connections.
That's I think that's really cool to hear. That, I mean, out of all my mates here, you strike me as someone particularly analytical and organised and clean. And it's cool to hear you still work through the same instinctual practice that I would or Melinda would as very, messy, unstructured people.
But I think it's the same thing. I just think of it through that structure. But I'm thinking it's the same thing. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Maybe the unconscious is something else.
I think that like objective reasoning, that kind of not thinking about it too hard and just letting that situational awareness sort of flow through what you're doing. I think that's very similar, even if the outcomes are very different.
So if you want to read more on that, Echo has written quite a lot about creative abduction.
I'll be looking into that for sure.
When you're writing your PhD.
Time. Let's have a quick break. I'll change over the reel.
Wind up the motor.
I actually don't think I turned that on at all. Now that I think about it.
Are you for the whole lot?
No, just for that. Just for that 20 seconds we started getting into the chapter. Another clap. So I liked what you said the other day where you likened drawing to books and cinema. I thought that was really nice.
In that it's a temporal... so when I think about drawing, I just think of it as a linear construct. So I'm not so tied to the materials, traditional materials of drawing. So, when I'm reading a book, I'm thinking about it through the narrative, and that's like lines that twist and tangle together. I have no problem thinking about that as a drawing. And the same with film, cinema, and other type of temporal arts, because if it's temporal, there's going to be strings of things happening through it, and that's enough for me to think of it as a drawing and to approach it compositionally as a drawing too. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it relates strongly to, in my paper I talked about Alan Caprow and his claim that non-art is more art than art.
Yeah.
That there's so many complex, beautiful things in life that are so artful, but they're not art.
Yeah.
Because art is a system of organisation that we throw the world into.
Yes, and we spend a lot of time in art trying to make it less art.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he's onto something. Yeah.
So I guess on that, to wrap up, you know, in talking about organisational practice, we've got to talk about curation because, I mean, I've always said that I wasn't going to do a gallery show until I was doing it with people I cared about and loved, and you made that happen. You know, we had that group show at Scratch last year, which, you know, no sweat off your back. It's what you want to do anyway, but you know, to myself, to John, to a lot of us, it was really meaningful to kind of have that. And, you know, in the same way that I'm trying to bring people together here and with my podcast, I just wanted to ask, you know, what is driving that work into community?
Yeah, okay. So that particular show was such a beautiful thing. So that was the MFA1 group coming together at the end of that year and showing together. It was a COVID year, so you know, we were all in our own spaces, in our own places, and it was such a lovely thing to come together at the end. I also had deferred that year, so I had been absent for a lot of it, and I was missing you guys. So it was also just a pleasure for me to pull that together. And I think it was the first time a few people had shown, so that was nice for them. But it was also just nice for us to create community. And I realised after doing that that's one of the main things that I want to do during my Masters is just create community and create ties, because that's all we really have when we leave this place.
Yeah.
The bit of paper is nice to have, but yeah, what we really have is community.
I mean, when you're in the arts, the piece of paper, how much does that even mean?
Well, you could use it in a performance where you set it on fire, or you could make origami. I don't know. So yeah, building community is really important. And so whenever I have the opportunity to pull people together, then that's the kind of one of the important things about my curatorial projects. But the other part of my curatorial projects is pushing an idea further. So there may be something, a bit of a question or a bit of research that I'm doing in my own practice that can be pushed much further if I get a group of people together who are working in the same space. And I think of a show in that way as a conversation. So the works come together and they build out that conversation and they push the research forward. So that's the second show that I curated that year was called Chronolinear here at the Library Stairwell Gallery.
With Tara.
Yeah, with Tara. And so that was great getting all those works together to see how time played out in those works. Painters, printmakers and drawing people, all having quite a different approach. So that was part of curating that project was a research task. It was something that pushed my research forward. But it also built community between those people, which is fantastic. And I know that, you know, I'm going to continue working with all those people moving forward. So yeah, that's the two driving forces underneath my curatorial drive.
It's great that there's a sense that these things are feeding into each other. And I imagine, like, in assembling a group of artists to flesh out a bit of research, just the relational weight that must create. Like, I feel that must really help give a bit of meat to your research, as well as a bit of, like, spatial and currency with our present time, right?
Yes. Yeah, but it also has a randomizing factor in that things come up that you can't imagine. And the relationship between works when you put them together brings up ideas and that you didn't foresee. So I like the chance aspect of that as well. Yeah. So I think it's something I'll continue to do. And I actually, when I'm looking at everyone's work in the postgrad show, it's just all getting filed. It's when I was talking about abductive reasoning and filing things, I just absorb file. And at some point in the near future, I'll be going, I want to make a show about process and space. I remember these people were working with that. So, so I'm looking forward to continuing that and bringing people together more and more. And in that idea, I'm currently working with Articulate, which is a gallery and an RE in Leichhardt, and trying to think about how I can bring together. We have one program coming up where we're trying to bring together established and emerging artists, so pairing them up for residencies.
Right.
And then there's another group of residencies that we're doing for mature age female artists,
right,
and how they're pushing their practice forward. Just building community, building ties within the community. This is part of my interest. So if all I get out of this is a handful of people that I know and I love that I can work with, then that's just awesome.
Yeah, I mean that's really great. And I mean you've just touched on it with Articulate, but are there any other future plans in the works that we should know about?
There could be, but it's not for me to say. I've learnt. Look, the last 3 months transitioning Articulate from an old board to a new board has been a steep learning curve.
Yeah, right.
Like I've never worked with a volunteer-run organisation before, and it was introduction by fire, immersion by fire. So look, I've learnt a lot. Is all I can say. And what I've learnt is that it takes effort. It takes more than just intention. It takes effort, love, and energy to bring these things together. Yeah,
I mean, I can empathise more than most, I think, with coordinating people and kind of the many challenges of these professional contingencies, right? Is there any strategy you've developed in maintaining those?
No, when I met the new board for Articulate first up, one of the first things I said to them is, just coming clean, I'm not a people person. And so,
opens with that.
Yeah. And
sorry, I'm a bit of a cunt.
These are all people I've never met before, and we're about to work together on a team for the next, how many years. And I go, I'm not a people person. But I needed to be straight up because, I'm there with the energy, the enthusiasm, the structure, the building, the skills, and, all of that, negotiating structure, all of that stuff. But you need a really friendly front person who's like really customer focused, kind of happy face person. And so, thank God there's a heap of those people in the group.
I think you're,
Yeah, I'm personable.
You're definitely a people person.
In small amounts.
Yeah. I guess not to the extent of a, social media advisor or anything.
Yeah.
That's a different breed.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. You need all breeds, is what I've learned. Yeah. Did you not know I'm not a people person? Doesn't come across. Oh, that's good.
It doesn't come across. I mean, I think I'm a grumpy person, but people say I'm friendly enough. Everything's good in small quantities.
Yeah. But so curation is necessarily going to continue because I've put myself in the position with these REs that are going to move forward, which is great. What are you doing over the next few months? Would you like to join us in this RE?
I would love to join you. I'm walking the earth for the next year.
Are you?
Which is just saying I'm having a year off.
Awesome.
It's been a long 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment, which is kind of what's paying my rent.
Yeah.
But I'd love to be involved in future. I'm looking to stay in touch with everyone. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
I'll call on you. So what's the book about?
It's a science fiction novel that...
sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Can I just talk about something else just briefly?
Of course.
And that is the relationship between science and art.
Oh yes, how have we not talked about that?
So, I've had conversations with some people who will remain unnamed, And the gist of this conversation is that there is some frustration when artists pretend they're doing science.
Yeah. Oh yes. I feel that pain so heavily.
So tell me, what are you thinking about it?
So I've always maintained that the more you get into science, like say we'll use James Turrell as an example. People like to use optical theory, but kind of the heavier you go into the science, the harder it's going to be to pull off the artwork. And so I think, you know, that kind of frustration comes from kind of, you know, the treatment of science and the visuals of science as any other material. And it comes across very junkish to scientists. Sure.
So are you saying that Turrell is unsuccessful?
I'm saying he's very successful because
in translating the science.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like he did a lot of research into optics and space and light.
Yep.
Whereas everyone after him that's kind of tried to do the same thing, if it doesn't,
is doing science light.
Yeah, like if you're not going into the same detail, it's just junkish, and it doesn't do the science any credit.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. It's interesting. I agree. I think I'm totally okay with artists using science and data and research information that comes out of science. It's totally fine. And using it at any level, I'm also okay with it. But what I'm not okay with is when an artist says that the outcome is X, when in fact, if you trace what's occurred, the outcome is not X.
Yeah.
So don't pretend that you've got the outcome that you don't have.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of related to what I was saying, that like it gets passed off then as if it's adding to the research, whereas often it's more just an outcome that's used the research as a jumping off point.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's where because I'm using this abductive reasoning and my touch on the physics of time is a fairly light touch. Well, you know, I've read 3 or 4 books about it, but it's a fairly light touch.
How thick were the books?
Well, what was the weight? It's a fairly light touch, and so that's information sits in the back of my mind, and when I'm drawing something will come up that evokes the same imagery that I had when I was reading about it, and that is sufficient a link for me to start massaging that and following that. So it's not that what I draw is diagrammatic of what I've read, is that it has touched a nerve with something else that's happening or has resonated with something I'm drawing, and it comes up that way. But I'm not making art that expresses the physics of time.
Yeah. I think that's a really great distinction to make too.
Yeah, and that's the only problem I have with that relationship between, I think sometimes artists take on the prestige associated with using scientific data and or research without staying true to the outcome. And if you diverge from the outcome, if you take a detour, that's totally cool. Do the research, take a detour, and just call it that.
Yeah.
But don't say it's not what it's not. Anyway, have I said the same thing 3 times?
No.
Pretty much.
No, you're all good.
Yeah, I can't think of any examples that I'd say are bad. Yeah.
I mean, I've got a few, but I don't want to do
Yes. Yeah, no,
the
but I mean...
MCA sticks out. There's been a few at the MCA that tickled my ribs a little bit.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, exhibition catalogues are funny sometimes. You go, what? Yeah, you can see when it's fairly transparent.
I mean, the one, actually, I will mention it because she's large enough that she won't care if she fucking sees this.
Yeah.
Janet Lawrence's thing at the MCA.
Ah, yes.
People love that, and I understand why people loved it. But at the end of the day, she killed a fucking tree, put it in a gallery. Like, she would have had to treat that with all sorts of chemicals so that it could go in the gallery space.
Yeah.
And so that, I feel, is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that it's like, all right, well, how environmental is the artwork? Because sure, it's got a message, but the material of the art is dead.
Well, this is
it's
something.
A corpse of a fucking tree.
Well, this. Now you've wandered into a different area. Okay, because there's things. For example, where do you stand on environmental artists who are concerned with the environment, climate change, etc., 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 Anthropocene, blah blah blah, using concrete in their work?
Yeah. What's the maths on that? It's like a kilo of concrete is like a ton of carbon or something ridiculous.
Yeah, so it's a similar thing. It's having some the integrity of staying true to not just the surface, the way it looks, but the intention has some research underneath and understands the consequences of actions. Yep.
And back to materials and what they mean.
Yep. Yep. Which might be a nice place to end, is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, nice place to end. Thanks for having a chat.
Oh, it's been wonderful. And sorry I cut you off in the middle of your book, but we can have that chat offline.
We can chat off camera, yeah, it's fine.
All right, lovely. Thanks, Ollie.
Awesome.
Cheers. Cheers, begin.
One and done.
I'm rubbing it on.
No, it's